Welcome to In the Know News. Ukraine has just received a STA $1.1 billion installment from the International Monetary Fund. Prime Minister Denys Shmyhal announced this on Telegram, marking the sixth tranche under the Extended Fund Facility program. The funds are already in Ukrainian accounts and will be directed toward critical budget expenses. Stay tuned for more details.
All right, so get this. Imagine you're trying to rebuild your house, but there's like a tornado still swirling around you.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of what's happening in Ukraine right now. And the International Monetary Fund,
Right.
the IMF, is playing a big role.
Yeah.
You've probably heard about them sending billions to help, but we're going to unpack just what that means and what it could mean for everyone involved.
For sure. It's a complex situation, but we can break it down.
Okay.
The IMF just handed over another $1.1 billion to Ukraine.
Wow.
Think of it as like a much-needed cash infusion for a country struggling to keep its head above water.
Okay, pause for a sec. 1.1 billion sounds huge, and it is, but this is actually part of a much bigger loan program, right?
Exactly. This is the seventh installment of a $15.6 billion package.
Wow.
And Ukraine has already received almost $10 billion.
Wow.
But this isn't a blank check.
Right?
There are strings attached conditions Ukraine must meet to keep that money flowing.
Ah, the fine print. So it's not just a freebie.
Not at all. The IMF at its core is like a global financial doctor.
Okay.
They step in when countries are facing serious economic trouble.
Yeah.
Offer loans and prescribe a course of treatment.
Right.
In this case, that treatment involves a whole bunch of reforms aimed at improving Ukraine's economy.
Reform sounds a bit vague. Can we
Yeah.
get into the nitty-gritty?
Sure.
What kind of changes are we talking about?
Think of it as a major overhaul of how things work.
Okay.
Public finance management that's making sure the government is collecting taxes efficiently, spending responsibly, and managing debt wisely.
Yep.
Then there's the financial sector, which needs to be stable, trustworthy, and free of corruption.
Right.
And of course, good governance overall.
Yeah.
Fighting corruption and upholding the rule of law, all crucial for long-term success.
So the IMF is saying, look, we'll help you out, but you need to fix some fundamental problems in your system.
Precisely. The goal is to make Ukraine's economy more resilient, transparent, and attractive to investors.
Right.
But, doing all this in the middle of a war, well, it's no easy feat.
That's putting it mildly. It's like trying to learn to swim while you're caught in a rip current.
Oh, yeah.
Some people might argue it's the wrong time to be demanding these reforms.
It's a valid point. And there's a legitimate debate about the timing and the potential burden.
Yeah.
Critics argue that these reforms, while well-intentioned, could add strain at a time when Ukraine is already stretched incredibly thin.
So where do we even start unpacking this?
Mhm.
I mean, how does a country even function, let alone implement major overhauls when they're in the middle of a war?
That's where things get even more complicated.
Right.
The IMF's support, even with these conditions, sends a message to the world that Ukraine is worth investing in.
Okay.
But we need to dive deeper into what these reforms really mean for everyday people and whether they can actually work in such a volatile environment.
Welcome back to the deep dive.
We left off talking about these IMF-mandated reforms.
Right.
It sounds good in theory, transparency, good governance, but how does that translate to real life in Ukraine, especially with a war going on?
That's the crucial question, isn't it?
Take, for example, public finance management.
Okay.
This means ensuring that every hryvnia, every dollar, is accounted for and used efficiently. It's about preventing waste and corruption.
Right.
Making sure that money meant for hospitals actually gets to hospitals.
Right.
That teachers are paid on time, and infrastructure projects aren't riddled with kickbacks.
So it's about building trust in the system.
Yeah.
Making sure aid money isn't vanishing into thin air.
Exactly. And it's not just about managing existing funds. It's about creating a system that can attract new investments. Imagine you're a business considering setting up shop in Ukraine.
Yeah.
You'd want to know that the rules are clear.
Yeah.
That contracts are honored and that your investment is safe.
Makes sense. No one wants to throw money into a black hole. But can you really expect Ukraine to implement these kinds of sweeping reforms while they're fighting for their very survival? Isn't that asking a bit much?
It's a tough situation, no doubt.
Yeah.
Some critics argue that the IMF is being too rigid, too focused on textbook solutions without fully grasping the reality on the ground. They say that these reforms, while important in the long run, could divert resources and energy away from the immediate war effort.
It's like asking someone to bake a cake while their house is on fire.
Yeah.
Priorities, right? But on the other hand, if Ukraine wants a future, doesn't it need to start building a solid foundation now, even amidst the chaos?
That's the dilemma. It's a delicate balancing act, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
The IMF has to weigh the urgency of this situation against the need for long-term stability and sustainable growth.
Right.
They can't just throw money at the problem without ensuring it's used wisely.
So it's a high-stakes game for both sides. Ukraine needs the money, but the IMF needs to see progress, some reassurance that their investment is making a difference.
Yeah.
But let's zoom out for a moment.
Sure.
We keep talking about Ukraine, but this situation has implications way beyond its borders, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This isn't just about one country. It's a microcosm of the challenges facing the global economy. We're seeing the ripple effects of war,
Yeah.
the interconnectedness of financial systems,
Right.
and the crucial role of international institutions like the IMF in trying to keep things from spiraling out of control.
So what happens in Ukraine doesn't stay in Ukraine.
Right.
This conflict, this financial support package, it's all part of a much bigger picture.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand the nuances of this story.
Yeah.
The decisions being made today, the reforms being implemented, the success or failure of this IMF program, it all has the potential to shape not just Ukraine's future, but the global landscape as well.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick pause to digest all this, but stay tuned. We'll be back shortly to explore what this all means for the future, both for Ukraine and for the world. Okay, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into this complex story of Ukraine and the IMF.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground, from those massive billion-dollar loans
Right.
to the nitty-gritty of economic reforms. But I'm left wondering, what does this actually look like for everyday people in Ukraine?
That's where it gets real, right? Remember that phrase, critical budget expenditures?
Yeah.
Well, that translates to keeping the lights on, literally.
Right.
It's about ensuring hospitals have the resources to treat the wounded, that schools can stay open,
Yeah.
that pensions are paid, and essential infrastructure is maintained.
So even amidst the war, life goes on.
Right.
And these IMF funds are helping to make that possible. But let's be honest.
Sure.
It's not a cure-all. Even with this aid, Ukraine faces a long and difficult road to recovery.
Absolutely. The war continues to have a devastating impact, and rebuilding a shattered economy is a monumental task.
Yeah.
But there's a glimmer of hope, a potential turning point in those future IMF disbursements we mentioned earlier.
Right. The potential $2.7 billion in 2025.
Yeah.
But what are the chances that money actually materializes? Are we talking about a sure thing or a long shot?
It all hinges on those IMF reviews. Think of them as progress reports. They'll be looking for concrete evidence that Ukraine is implementing those agreed-upon reforms, making tangible improvements in governance, transparency, and accountability.
Right.
They'll want to see that the money is being used effectively, not just disappearing into a black hole.
So no pressure, Ukraine.
Yeah.
But seriously, what if they stumble? What if the reforms hit a snag or corruption rears its ugly head?
Right.
Does the IMF just walk away?
It's not quite that simple. The IMF understands that this is an unprecedented situation.
Okay.
That Ukraine is operating under extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah.
They've shown a willingness to be flexible, to work with the government through challenges, but there are limits. If progress stalls, if there are serious concerns about misuse of funds, those future disbursements could be jeopardized.
It's a delicate dance, high wire act. Ukraine needs the money, but the IMF needs to protect its investment, ensure that its funds are being used responsibly. But let's not forget the elephant in the room, the ongoing war. How can we even talk about long-term economic recovery when the conflict is still raging?
That's the million-dollar question. The war casts a long shadow over everything, creates enormous uncertainty, and makes planning for the future incredibly difficult. But it's precisely because of this uncertainty that the IMF's role is so crucial. By providing financial support, even with conditions attached, they're signaling to the world that Ukraine has a future worth investing in.
It's a vote of confidence, a message of hope amidst the darkness.
Yeah.
So for our listener out there, someone trying to make sense of this complex situation, what's the key takeaway here? Why should they care about what's happening in Ukraine?
Because it's a story that resonates far beyond its borders. It's about the resilience of a nation fighting for its survival.
Right.
The challenges of rebuilding in the face of adversity and the role of global institutions in navigating a turbulent world. Right. It's about the interconnectedness of our economies, the ripple effects of conflict, and the power of financial support to shape destinies.
It's about the human cost of war, the struggle for a better future, and the hope that even in the darkest of times, there are forces working to bring light. We hope this deep dive has given you a glimpse into this complex and evolving story, sparked your curiosity to learn more, and maybe even inspired you to action.
Because this is a story that's still being written, and we all have a role to play in shaping its ending.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep believing in the power of knowledge to make a difference.
Ukraine's receipt of the $1.1 billion from the IMF marks an important step in securing financial stability during challenging times. As the country continues to navigate its fiscal needs, these funds will play a crucial role in supporting essential budgetary expenses. Stay tuned for more updates on Ukraine's financial progress and global economic news.